aliens forced to surrender until the humans helped. The sky above Xiron 7 was a swirling canvas of dark clouds and faint streaks of light. From orbit, the planet looked like a wounded jewel, its cities scarred by countless bombardments. Smoke rose in gray pillars, carrying the smell of burned metals and ozone. On the surface, the ground quivered as the remnants of Krithan defense turrets fired at distant enemy ships, sparks scattering across shattered terrain. The once great Krithan Empire was on the edge of collapse. Vurail, a young Krithan fleet commander, stood in the command tower of the capital city, her eyes scanning the battlefield with a mixture of dread and disbelief. She had trained for wars, for difficult campaigns, but nothing could have prepared her for this moment. The enemy fleets, an alliance of several alien races known for their ruthlessness, were surrounding Xiron 7 from all sides. Their ships moved with terrifying precision, striking at Krithan forces with calculated cruelty. Each strike was faster than the last, leaving little room for counterattack. The Krithan High Council had gathered in the tower's central chamber. Vurail could hear their low, tense voices even from her post. Arguments and debates echoed through the hall, each more desperate than the last. Some council members demanded surrender, arguing that further resistance would only bring complete annihilation. Others insisted that holding out, even for a few more days, might allow for reinforcements or an unexpected advantage. Vurail clenched her claws on the railing, her mind racing. The thought of surrender was bitter. Her ancestors had fought countless wars to build the Krithan Empire, defending its honor and culture. To give it up now, to bow to invaders, seemed impossible. Yet the reality was undeniable. The Krithans were outnumbered, outgunned, and outmaneuvered. The communications console beeped sharply, breaking her thoughts. Vurail stepped forward and tapped the interface. A transmission was incoming, but it was unusual. The signal signature did not match any of the known alien fleets. She hesitated, her instincts warning her that it could be a trap. Yet something about the signal was different. She activated the feed. A human appeared on the screen. Their appearance was striking. They were tall, upright, and walked in a way that seemed unbalanced but confident. Their armor looked strange to the Krithans, composed of shining panels and glowing lines, unlike any Krithan design. The human's face was calm, almost unnervingly so, as if they were observing a scene in which no danger existed. "This is a human fleet," the human said, their voice steady and clear. "We are not here to attack, we are here to help." Vurail's eyes narrowed. Help from humans. She had heard of humans through intercepted communications and rumors, but they were considered unpredictable at best, dangerous at worst. They had no known allegiance to any galactic coalition, and their technology was strange. The Krithans had always viewed them as reckless, almost primitive, yet capable of surprising ingenuity. "Why should we trust you?" Vurail demanded, her voice firm. "We have fought our enemies for centuries. You are outsiders. How do we know you will not betray us?" The human tilted their head slightly, a gesture that seemed casual but carried a quiet confidence. "Because we fight for what we believe is right. We do not follow alliances unless they align with our values. Your people are in danger, and we have the means to change that. You will decide whether to accept it." Vurail glanced around the command room. Her crew stared at the screen, their expressions a mixture of fear, curiosity, and skepticism. Even the council members, who had been arguing about surrender for hours, paused at the unusual transmission. None of them had expected an intervention from outside forces, especially not from humans, who rarely involved themselves in other civilizations' wars. For several tense moments, silence hung over the room. Then a voice came through the intercom, trembling with a mixture of hope and disbelief. "Commander Vurail," said one of her lieutenants, "they have weapons, advanced ones. They claim they can neutralize enemy fire without destroying ships. If true, they could save us." Vurail felt her heart quicken. The idea was almost too incredible to believe, but she could not ignore the possibility. She had seen too many of her soldiers fall, too many cities burn. If there was even a chance that these humans could help, she could not dismiss it. She activated the communication channel fully. "Show us your capabilities," she demanded. "If you truly intend to help, prove it." "The Krithans are willing to listen, but we will not gamble with deception." The human nodded. "Understood. We will demonstrate our method. But know this, cooperation is required. We cannot act alone. Your fleet must work with us, and your people must trust our approach." Vurail's claws tightened around the railing. Trust. That was the hardest part. Crithans were cautious by nature, trained to evaluate every risk, every possibility of betrayal. Humans seem to operate differently, with instincts and intuition leading them rather than strategy alone. It was unnerving, and yet, perhaps that was their strength. The human fleet appeared in orbit above Xiron 7. Unlike the alien coalition, their ships moved in unusual formations, zigzagging and rotating in ways that seemed chaotic but purposeful. Virel's tactical officers studied the movements, initially confused. Then slowly, patterns emerged, unexpected tactics that minimized exposure to enemy fire while maximizing coverage of vulnerable areas. One of the senior officers, a veteran Crithan strategist named Marvin, turned to Virel with wide eyes. These humans, their movements are unpredictable but effective. I cannot explain it fully, but they avoid the weaknesses of conventional fleet formations. If we integrate with them, we could stand a chance. Virel nodded slowly. She could feel the tension in the command room ease slightly. It was not hope yet, but it was a flicker of possibility. The Crithans had fought for millennia, and they had never been truly without hope. Perhaps now, with these humans, they had a new path forward. She made her decision. "Prepare the fleet for coordination," she ordered. "We will work with the humans, but remember, trust must be earned and every move must be calculated. We cannot fail." The human on the screen gave a small nod, almost as if acknowledging her words. "We understand. We will begin immediately. Follow our lead, and the tide can turn in your favor." Virel turned away from the screen, her mind racing. She could not ignore the fear, the weight of responsibility pressing on her shoulders. Every decision she made now could mean the difference between survival and annihilation. Yet there was a spark of determination deep within her, a reminder of why she had joined the fleet, why she had trained, why she had fought for her people. The first steps of collaboration began with cautious maneuvers. Crithan pilots were instructed to follow human ships in small groups, observing their techniques, learning to anticipate their unpredictable patterns. At first, there were missteps. Ships collided, communications were misinterpreted, and some pilots doubted the human methods entirely. But slowly, the Crithans adapted. They began to see the logic behind the humans' apparent chaos. Retreats became strategic, attacks became swift and precise, and the fleet moved with a newfound energy. Virel watched with a mix of pride and disbelief. The human influence was transforming her fleet in ways she had not thought possible. Hours turned into days, and the first signs of change appeared on the battlefield. Enemy ships that had been advancing with confidence were suddenly slowed, their formations disrupted by unexpected maneuvers. Crithan defenses, once vulnerable and disorganized, began to respond with coordination and precision. Yet Virel knew the real challenge was still ahead. The humans had brought hope, but the war was far from over. Every step forward would be met with resistance, every strategy tested by the cunning of their enemies. The fate of Xiron 7 hung in the balance, and she understood that the future depended not just on technology or strategy, but on trust, courage, and the willingness to embrace the unknown. As night fell over the capital city, Virel stood alone on a balcony overlooking the battlefield. The sky was a dark sea of clouds, illuminated by distant explosions and the faint glimmer of stars beyond. She felt the weight of history pressing on her, the responsibility of her ancestors and the lives of her people. And yet she felt something else as well, an unfamiliar, powerful sense of hope. The humans had arrived. They had offered a hand when all seemed lost. And for the first time in many long months, Virel allowed herself to imagine that survival, even victory, might still be possible. The war was far from over. The Crithans still faced impossible odds, and surrender had only been delayed, not avoided. But with humans now among them, the tides of battle could change. And Virel, young commander and reluctant believer, understood that in this new alliance lay the first spark of a future that none of them had dared to dream. The stars above Xiron 7 shone faintly, but for the first time they seemed to promise more than darkness. The Crithan command tower buzzed with unusual activity. Ships lined the landing pads, unloading human crews and strange devices. The humans moved with quiet confidence, their every action precise and calculated, yet their demeanor carried a relaxed ease that unsettled the Crithans. They were unlike any ally the Crithans had ever encountered. They did not bow, they did not speak in elaborate formalities, and they seemed to question rules that had governed Krithan society for centuries. Viral watched them closely, her sharp eyes taking in their actions. The humans spoke among themselves in rapid bursts, pointing at holographic displays and running small tests with devices that hummed and glowed. One human approached her, standing taller than most Krithans, with bright eyes that seemed to miss nothing. "I am Captain Lena Morgan," the human said, her voice calm but carrying an undeniable authority. "We are here to help your people, but understand this, we do not follow tradition blindly. We act based on results and logic." Viral's claws clenched on the railing. "Your methods may be new to us," she replied carefully, "but we will follow if it brings success. Speak clearly. What is your plan?" Captain Morgan smiled faintly. "Your enemies rely on superior firepower and tight formation. They assume any fleet they face will respond in predictable ways. We intend to make the unpredictable work in your favor. We have developed devices capable of disrupting their energy weapons for short periods, giving your ships openings to strike. But the devices must be used strategically and in coordination with your fleet." Viral raised an eyebrow. "Disrupt their weapons? That sounds impossible, and coordination, your methods may be effective, but they require trust. Can we trust your humans to execute such plans without causing harm to our own fleet?" "Trust is built in action," Morgan replied, her gaze steady. "We will show you. You will see, and then you will decide." The Krithan Council gathered in the central chamber once again, this time with the humans present. Maps of the surrounding space and enemy positions floated in holographic displays. The human captain placed her hands on the console, pointing to areas where enemy ships clustered. "They think in straight lines, move in predictable patterns," Morgan explained. "We can use that. Your fleet can simulate retreats, but do not panic. Our devices will neutralize their primary weapons long enough for you to strike at key positions. But timing and coordination are everything. Hesitate, and the advantage is lost." Marvin, the Krithan strategist, leaned forward, scrutinizing the displays. "If what you say is true, it will require unprecedented synchronization. Our pilots are trained to follow precise protocols. Any deviation could result in disaster." "Exactly," Morgan said. "Which is why we will train with them. Humans are adaptable. We improvise when needed. We will teach your fleet to adapt without fear. You do not need to understand all our methods immediately. Just follow, observe, and learn." The next hours were chaotic. Krithan pilots, accustomed to rigid formations and precise orders, struggled to adjust to human improvisation. Ships moved in unexpected arcs, sudden feints, and sharp turns that left both Krithans and humans holding their breath. Crashes were narrowly avoided, and complaints echoed through comms as Krithan officers voiced their frustration. Viral observed quietly, noting the pilots' reactions. At first, there was panic, doubt, and tension, but gradually a change began to take hold. Pilots began to anticipate the humans' moves, learning to read the subtle cues in their behavior. Retreats became calculated, sudden advances found weak points in enemy lines, and a new rhythm emerged, a combination of human unpredictability and Krithan discipline. During one exercise, a human pilot named Rafe guided a group of Krithan ships through a simulated enemy ambush. The Krithans hesitated at first, unsure of the unconventional route. Rafe's voice crackled through comms, calm but insistent. "Trust your instincts, watch our lead. When you see the opportunity, strike. Hesitation is the enemy." Viral held her breath as the fleet executed the maneuver. They twisted and turned through imaginary blasts, using their speed and agility to evade attacks. By the end of the exercise, no ship had been lost, and the Krithans were visibly shaken, but not with fear. They were exhilarated. "Impossible," muttered one senior officer. "They did it. They actually made it work." Morgan nodded. "Not impossible, just unfamiliar. Your fleet is capable, but it needed a new perspective." Over the next days, humans and Krithans worked side by side. They exchanged knowledge in both directions. Humans learned to operate Krithan ships, understanding their energy systems and weaponry. Krithans learned to trust improvisation, adapting to new strategies that relied not only on calculations, but also on intuition. Viral spent hours observing Morgan and her team. She could not deny that humans carried something extraordinary, an unshakable confidence, a willingness to take risks that Krithans would never allow themselves. Yet it was not recklessness. Every move had a purpose, every risk calculated. Humans seemed to see possibilities that others overlooked, exploiting them with precision. One evening, as the two leaders reviewed fleet positions, Viril spoke quietly. "Your people, they are strange, reckless and daring, yet disciplined in ways I cannot fully comprehend." "How do you train them to think this way?" Morgan smiled faintly. "We don't. We let them think. We guide, we advise, but we do not control. Humans are most powerful when they make their own choices. That is what makes us unpredictable and effective." Viril considered this. Crithans prized control, logic, and predictability. Humans thrived on intuition, improvisation, and confidence. Perhaps this difference was what made them strong. Perhaps this was why the Crithans had survived this long only to falter, because they had never allowed flexibility to complement discipline. The first joint operation was planned carefully. It was a test, a controlled strike against a minor enemy outpost near Xiron 7. The goal was simple: disable a communications array that coordinated enemy fleet movements. If successful, it would demonstrate the power of the human-Crithan alliance. The fleets assembled at dawn. Crithan ships lined up beside human vessels, the contrast stark. Crithan craft were sleek and angular, painted in muted metallics, while human ships glowed with energy conduits and moved with almost erratic grace. Pilots exchanged nervous glances, both species aware of the risks. Viril's ship led the Crithan squadron, with Morgan's flagship coordinating human movements. As the fleet approached the target, the humans initiated the first step of their plan. Their devices emitted pulses that interfered with enemy sensors. The Crithans followed, performing maneuvers that had once seemed reckless, now guided by new instincts and trust. Enemy ships reacted quickly, but they were unprepared for the combined tactics. The human unpredictability, combined with Crithan precision, allowed the fleet to bypass defenses, strike weak points, and disable the communications array in record time. The success sent waves of relief and amazement through the Crithan forces. Pilots cheered over comms, celebrating their first true victory in months. Viril allowed herself a small smile, feeling a flicker of pride she had not experienced since the war began. But even as celebration spread, Viril knew the real challenge was still ahead. This operation had been small, a minor strike compared to the overwhelming force arrayed against them. The enemy would adapt, grow cautious, and retaliate with greater ferocity. The Crithans could not rely solely on human devices. They would need to continue learning, continue adapting, and continue trusting in their new allies. Later that night, Viril walked along the quiet landing pads, watching humans repair ships and adjust equipment. They worked tirelessly, not out of obligation, but out of purpose. They spoke quietly among themselves, laughing at small jokes, sharing observations, and planning the next step. Viril realized that this was more than training. It was a partnership built on mutual respect and understanding. Marvin approached her, his expression thoughtful. "I did not believe humans could make a difference," he admitted. "I was wrong. They are extraordinary. They bring more than technology. They bring courage, creativity, and a will to act when others hesitate." Viril nodded slowly. "Yes, but we must remain cautious. Our enemies are still strong, and this is only the beginning. If we fail now, everything we have gained could be lost." Marvin placed a hand on her shoulder. "Then we fight smarter and we fight together. With humans at our side, I believe we may finally have a chance." As dawn broke over Xiron 7, the first rays of sunlight pierced through the smoke and haze. Viril stood at the balcony once more, looking at the fleet preparing for the next mission. Humans and Crithans worked side by side, a combination of ingenuity and discipline that felt almost impossible. For the first time in months, she allowed herself to imagine the possibility of victory. The humans had arrived, bringing more than just weapons. They brought hope, strategy, and a new way of thinking. And while the war was far from over, the Crithans had discovered something they had long forgotten: the strength that came not just from power, but from courage, trust, and the willingness to embrace the unknown. The enemy would not expect them to fight this way. They would not expect humans to stand beside Crithans, daring to defy the impossible. And perhaps, just perhaps, this new alliance could change the course of the war forever. Viril took a deep breath, feeling the weight of responsibility settle on her shoulders once more. But this time she was not alone. She had humans at her side, guiding, advising, and fighting with her. Together they would face the challenges ahead, and the first spark of hope burned brightly in her heart. The stars above Xiron 7 shimmered faintly, signaling the arrival of a new day. And with it, the dawn of a partnership that could reshape the galaxy. The training grounds of Xiron 7 were alive with motion. Krithan ships lined the launch bays, their engines humming in anticipation. Humans moved among them, adjusting systems, explaining tactics, and occasionally laughing at a pilot's clumsy attempt to mimic human maneuvers. The Krithans, disciplined and precise, found the human methods bewildering at first. They had never been asked to improvise, to think beyond the rigid strategies drilled into them since birth. Viril stood on the observation deck, watching the activity below. The sun cast long shadows across the tarmac, glinting off metallic hulls. She could feel the tension in the air, thick with anticipation and the nervous energy of soldiers about to be tested. The human captain Lena Morgan approached, moving with that familiar, quiet confidence. "Your pilots will struggle at first," Morgan said, her eyes scanning the fleet. "But they will adapt faster than you expect. Humans are not the only ones who can improvise. You just need to give your people permission to trust their instincts." Viril frowned slightly. "Trust their instincts?" she repeated. "Krithans rely on discipline, not instinct. We cannot act recklessly and hope for success." Morgan smiled faintly. "It is not recklessness, it is calculated risk combined with observation and quick decision-making. Your pilots will learn. And once they do, they will become unpredictable in a way your enemies cannot anticipate." The first exercise began with hesitation. Krithan ships took off in formation, following human vessels that twisted and turned in ways that seemed chaotic. Laser turrets fired at simulated enemy targets, and the Krithan pilots struggled to match the humans' rhythm. Commands were shouted over comms, voices tense and sharp. Crashes were narrowly avoided, and some ships skidded off course, forcing others to compensate. "Focus on the flow, not the line," Rafe, a young human pilot, shouted over comms. "Watch our lead and react, don't calculate, move like water, not stone." The Krithans blinked at the metaphor. Some muttered complaints, others resisted, but slowly small changes began to appear. A pilot named Turin executed a sudden pivot, dodging a simulated missile strike and following Rafe's lead. Another pilot adjusted his firing pattern, finding weak points in the target's shields. Mistakes still happened, but victories, small and tentative, began to emerge. Viril felt a flicker of hope. This was unlike anything she had trained for, but she could see the potential. Krithan pilots were learning to combine discipline with flexibility, precision with improvisation. They were beginning to think like humans, even if only in small bursts. Over the next few days, the exercises grew more complex. The humans introduced new scenarios, forcing Krithans to think quickly and adapt in real time. Mock battles simulated ambushes, sensor failures, and sudden changes in enemy formations. Pilots shouted warnings, exchanged rapid commands, and learned to anticipate not just their own allies' moves, but the enemy's reactions. Viril observed the transformations with fascination. Krithan faces, once tight with tension and fear, now carried focus and determination. Mistakes were met with correction, not panic. They began to take risks, to trust themselves and their human allies. The fleet was learning to operate as a single entity, combining the strengths of both species in a way that felt revolutionary. Yet the chaos was not without consequences. During one particularly difficult drill, a Krithan ship miscalculated a maneuver and collided with a support vessel. Alarms blared, and pilots scrambled to prevent further damage. Humans rushed to assist, their movements calm and precise, guiding Krithans through damage control procedures. Viril clenched her claws, frustration and worry mixing. "This is why I feared your methods," she said to Morgan. "Even a small error can destroy us." Morgan placed a hand on the console. "And this is why we teach. Errors happen, but learning comes faster than fear. The pilots will remember and they will improve. Watch." By the end of the exercise, the fleet had recovered, repairing damage and completing the mission objectives. Krithan pilots had learned more in a single day than in weeks of traditional drills. Viril realized that humans were not reckless. They were teachers, pushing her people beyond the limits they had accepted for centuries. In the evenings, the training grounds quieted, but lessons continued. Humans and Krithans gathered around holographic tables, discussing strategies and analyzing movements. Laughter and debate filled the air as both species learned from each other. Humans asked questions about Krithan technology and tactics, while Crithans learned to question their instincts and explore unconventional solutions. Viral walked among them, observing. She noticed a small group of young Crithans, hesitant at first, practicing maneuvers with human pilots. One of them, Leora, laughed as she attempted a human-style evasive turn, nearly tipping her ship. Rafe called encouragements over comms, guiding her gently. Viral smiled quietly. This was more than training. It was a bridge between species, a bond forming through shared struggle and discovery. The humans also shared insights into enemy psychology. They explained how opposing fleets relied heavily on predictable patterns, rigid formations, and assumptions of Crithan caution. By breaking these patterns and exploiting hesitation, even a smaller force could gain an advantage. The Crithans absorbed the lessons, some skeptical at first, but gradually convinced by repeated demonstrations. One afternoon, the humans introduced a new device, a small, portable energy disruptor designed to temporarily disable enemy shields or weapons. They demonstrated it on a mock target, showing how careful timing could create openings for attacks. Crithan engineers watched closely, taking notes and asking questions. "This is remarkable," Marvin said. "If deployed correctly, it could turn the tide of battle." Morgan nodded. "Correct, but it requires precise coordination and trust. Every pilot must act in harmony. The smallest hesitation could nullify the effect." Viral felt the weight of responsibility settle over her once more. Training was one thing, but applying it in real combat would be far more dangerous. Yet she also recognized the opportunity. The humans had given them tools, tactics, and confidence, a chance to survive when all seemed lost. As the final exercise of the week began, Viral joined the pilots in the cockpit of her own ship. The scenario simulated an enemy ambush on a vital supply route. Humans led the way, guiding Crithan squadrons through complex maneuvers. Lasers flashed, engines roared, and simulated explosions lit the sky. Pilots shouted commands, adapting on the fly to changes in the battlefield. Viral found herself trusting her instincts, following the humans' unpredictable lead while making split-second decisions. It was exhilarating, terrifying, and unlike anything she had experienced. For the first time, she felt a deep connection with both her fleet and the humans guiding them. They were no longer separate forces. They were a single, cohesive unit. The exercise ended in success, with all ships completing the objectives and returning safely to base. Cheers and applause echoed through the landing bays. Pilots high-fived, laughed, and celebrated, exhausted but proud. Humans and Crithans alike shared smiles and nods of approval. Morgan approached Viral once more. "They have learned well," she said. "Your fleet is stronger than you realize. Trust and adaptability will carry you further than rigid discipline ever could." Viral nodded slowly. "Yes, but the real test will be when the enemy strikes back. We cannot rely solely on simulations." "No," Morgan agreed. "But you will be ready. You have begun to see what I see, a fleet capable of surprise, of resilience, of thinking beyond fear. That is what makes humans dangerous to their enemies, and now it can make Crithans just as formidable." As night fell, Viral walked the quiet tarmac, observing the fleet resting under dim lights. Ships stood ready, engines cooling, systems checked and repaired. Pilots shared stories and laughed softly, forming bonds that crossed species lines. Humans and Crithans alike were learning from one another, building trust through action and shared experience. Viral took a deep breath, looking up at the stars above Xiron 7. The war was far from over, and the challenges ahead were immense. Yet she felt something she had not felt in months: confidence. Her fleet was no longer just a collection of disciplined ships and fearful pilots. They were a united force, strengthened by the unpredictability and courage of humans. The first sparks of hope had been lit, but the real test was approaching. Enemy forces were still strong, still organized, and still relentless. Xiron 7's survival depended on the Crithans' ability to adapt, to trust, and to fight in ways they had never imagined. Viral knew the coming days would be difficult. Mistakes could cost lives, miscalculations could lead to disaster, and the enemy would not hesitate. But she also knew that the humans had shown them a path of courage, creativity, and partnership. And in that moment, standing among her fleet, watching the stars glimmer faintly above the war-torn planet, Viral understood that the Crithans had begun to change. They were no longer alone, no longer limited by fear and tradition. With humans at their side, they had a chance to fight back, to reclaim their homeworld, and perhaps even to achieve victory against overwhelming odds. The night was quiet, but the hum of engines and the soft chatter of pilots reminded her that preparation was ongoing. Every lesson learned, every maneuver practiced, every bond formed would matter when the real battle came. The stars above Xiron 7 shone faintly, but for Virel they held promise. A promise of hope, resilience, and the extraordinary strength that came from combining human daring with Krithan discipline. The war was far from over. But for the first time, Virel believed that survival, and perhaps victory, was possible. The distant sun barely illuminated the scarred horizon of Xiron 7 as the fleet prepared for its first real engagement. The human-Krithan alliance was no longer a simulation. Today, they faced the enemy for the first time in full force, and every pilot, every officer, and every crew member felt the weight of the moment pressing down like a stone. Virel stood on the command balcony of her flagship, her gaze fixed on the dark expanse above. Enemy scouts had been detected in orbit, moving in formations far larger than anticipated. Their ships gleamed with deadly intent, energy weapons already charging, sensors sweeping the skies. The Krithans had fought many battles, but this was unlike any before. They had faced enemies who respected protocol and expectation. Today they faced humans, allies whose methods defied all expectations, and that was their strength. Captain Lena Morgan's voice came through comms, calm and precise. All units follow our lead. Trust your instincts, but maintain coordination. Remember, unpredictability is our advantage. The enemy expects rigid patterns. We will break them. Virel nodded, her claws tightened around the railing. This is it, she murmured. No more practice, every move counts. The fleet launched simultaneously, a combination of Krithan sleek vessels and human ships that shimmered with glowing conduits. The enemy reacted immediately, their weapons blazing in streaks of light that cut through the dark sky. The first volleys were devastating, but the human devices activated almost instantly, sending pulses that disrupted enemy shields and energy systems for precious seconds. Krithan ships darted through openings, firing at weak points, evading attacks that would have been lethal just hours ago. Chaos erupted across the battlefield. Lasers crisscrossed, engines roared, and ships twisted and turned in ways that seemed impossible. Krithan pilots followed the humans' lead, improvising maneuvers they had only practiced in simulations. Some misjudged their timing, narrowly avoiding collisions. Others executed near-perfect strikes, exploiting openings in enemy formations. Virel's own ship wove through enemy fire, following a human wing nearby. She could hear the tension in comms, the sharp breaths of her pilots, and the steady, calm voice of Rafe guiding them. Keep moving, don't hesitate. If they expect fear, give them chaos. The Krithans had never fought like this. Discipline remained, but now it was combined with intuition, improvisation, and courage. The enemy, initially confident in their superiority, began to falter. Their attacks, calculated and precise in past battles, were thrown into disarray by the unpredictable movement of the human Krithan fleet. In the midst of the engagement, a Krithan cruiser came under heavy fire. Its shields flickered, systems failing. Virel noticed and immediately adjusted her course, signaling her squad to assist. Humans and Krithans moved together, forming a protective pattern that shielded the damaged ship while suppressing enemy advances. A warning alarm sounded on Virel's bridge. Enemy flagship detected. It was massive, bristling with weapons and shielding that had decimated Krithan fleets before. Virel felt a surge of apprehension. Attacking directly would be suicidal. Yet Morgan's voice cut through her hesitation. Target their coordination nodes, disrupt the flagship's energy flow. We create the opening, you exploit it. Trust your training. Virel nodded. Her squadron split into smaller units, weaving through enemy fire while human pilots executed precise feints. One by one, the devices pulsed, temporarily disabling weapon systems and forcing the flagship's defenses into disarray. Krithan ships seized the moment, firing concentrated volleys at vulnerable points. The flagship shuddered under the attack, energy surges visible across its hull. Its weapons faltered, giving the combined fleet an unprecedented advantage. Yet the enemy was not defeated. They began to adapt, redirecting fire and changing formations. The battle intensified, a deadly dance of skill, instinct, and timing. Viril noticed one of her pilots, a young Krithan named Turin, trapped between two enemy ships. Without hesitation, she coordinated a rescue. Her squadron flanked the enemy, drawing fire while humans led Turin to safety. The maneuver was risky but successful. Turin's relief was evident over comms, and Viril allowed herself a small, proud smile. Hours seemed to stretch into eternity. The enemy's forces thinned, their formations broken by the relentless unpredictability of the alliance. Krithan and human ships moved together like a single organism, each action supporting the next. Energy disruptors pulsed at critical moments, shields flared, and laser fire carved precise paths. The battlefield was a chaotic masterpiece, impossible to predict yet methodically controlled by the cooperation of the two species. Viril's ship was next in line to engage the enemy flagship directly. Her heart pounded as she approached the massive vessel, the culmination of the human Krithan strategy. Enemy fire lashed out, but the training, improvisation, and trust built over days carried them through. The flagship's defenses flickered as another energy disruption pulse hit, and Viril seized the opportunity. She executed a maneuver she had never imagined attempting, twisting her ship into the perfect trajectory, firing concentrated volleys into weak points identified by human analysis. The flagship groaned under the pressure, systems failing, weapons collapsing. Its massive form began to list, smoke and sparks escaping from breached hull sections. The victory was not complete, enemy forces still remained, but it was decisive. The flagship's fall shattered enemy morale. The remaining ships, now leaderless and disoriented, began retreating, unable to maintain order against the relentless, coordinated unpredictability of the human Krithan fleet. Viril exhaled sharply, a mix of relief, exhaustion, and pride washing over her. The fleet had survived its first real battle, and not only survived, they had won. Krithan ships returned to orbit, some damaged but intact, guided by human coordination and technology. Pilots cheered over comms, their voices tinged with disbelief and elation. Morgan's voice came through, calm and steady as always. "Well done. This is only the beginning. Remember what you learned today. Trust your instincts, act together, and the impossible becomes possible." Viril allowed herself a rare smile. She had doubted humans, feared their unpredictability, and questioned their methods. Yet now she saw the truth. Their courage, their intuition, and their willingness to act decisively had turned what seemed like certain defeat into victory. Marvin joined her on the observation deck, his expression a mix of awe and relief. "I underestimated them," he admitted. "Humans, they are something else. They have changed the way we fight." "Yes," Viril said softly, "they have not just given us tactics or devices. They have given us a new way of thinking, and that is more powerful than any weapon." Even as celebrations spread through the fleet, Viril knew the war was far from over. The enemy would regroup, adapt, and return stronger. This victory had proven the potential of the human-Krithan alliance, but it had also painted a target on their backs. The coming battles would be even more dangerous, and mistakes could be deadly. That night, the Krithan capital glimmered beneath a dark sky, dotted with the glow of human ships and Krithan vessels alike. Pilots and crews rested, repaired, and prepared for the challenges ahead. Viril walked along the balcony, feeling the weight of command more keenly than ever. She knew that this alliance was fragile, dependent not just on technology, but on trust, cooperation, and the courage of every individual. She paused, looking out at the stars. They seemed brighter tonight, not because the sky had changed, but because hope had been kindled. Humans had arrived not just to fight, but to teach, to guide, and to inspire. And that hope, fragile though it might be, was a weapon more powerful than any laser or energy disruptor. A message came through comms from a human pilot, casual but filled with camaraderie. "Commander Viril, your pilots fought like legends. Keep them this way, and we might just shock the galaxy." Viril allowed herself a small laugh. "We are only beginning," she replied. "The enemy will learn to fear not just our weapons, but our unpredictability." In the quiet aftermath, Viril reflected on the transformation she had witnessed. The Krithans were no longer merely survivors, they were a force to be reckoned with. The combination of human ingenuity, courage, and adaptability with Krithan discipline and precision had created something new, something neither species could have achieved alone. As dawn approached, signaling another day of conflict, Viril knew the alliance had been tested and had passed. The first battle was won, but the war continued. The enemy would not surrender easily, and every decision, every maneuver, every act of courage would matter. Yet for the first time in many long months, Viril felt a fierce and unshakable belief. With humans at their side, the Crithans had a chance, not just to survive, but to reclaim their homeworld, to fight back, and to change the course of history. The stars above Xiron 7 gleamed with faint light, reflecting on the battle-scarred surface below. In that quiet brilliance, Viril saw the promise of what was possible, a galaxy where courage, trust, and alliance could overcome even the most overwhelming odds. The enemy might regroup, the battles would continue, and the war was far from over. But the human-Crithan alliance had proven one thing. When two species dared to trust one another, when they combined ingenuity with discipline, even the impossible could be achieved. And in that knowledge, Viril found strength. The battle had been raging for hours above Xiron 7, yet the human-Crithan fleet pressed on with relentless determination. Enemy forces, though wounded from the previous engagement, had regrouped in tighter formations, attempting to encircle the planet and crush the defenders once and for all. The stakes could not have been higher. Every pilot knew that failure meant annihilation, not just for them, but for the people of Crithans and the future of their homeworld. Viril stood on the command bridge, her claws gripping the railing as she surveyed the expanse of space. She had witnessed the fleet grow from a hesitant, fearful group into a force that could rival even the most experienced alien coalitions. Human ingenuity had transformed Crithans in ways she had never thought possible. Now it was time to see if that transformation could carry them to victory. Morgan's voice came through comms, calm yet commanding. All units maintain formation. Engage the flagship directly when the disruption devices are ready. Timing is everything. We strike together, we strike precisely, or we risk losing everything. Viril took a deep breath and nodded. Understood, we are ready. The fleet surged forward, engines blazing, weaving between laser fire and missile streams. Enemy ships opened fire in waves, but the human devices pulsed at critical moments, neutralizing their weapons long enough for Crithan ships to move into advantageous positions. The combined fleet's strategy was simple in concept but difficult in execution. Human unpredictability created openings, Crithans exploited them with precision, and together they aimed to isolate and destroy the enemy command center, the heart of their operations. Chaos erupted across the battlefield. Ships darted in every direction, lasers crisscrossed like lightning, and energy disruptors pulsed at regular intervals. Crithan and human pilots shouted orders, warnings, and encouragement over comms, their voices overlapping in a symphony of urgency and determination. Every second counted, every maneuver could mean life or death. Viril's squadron was tasked with flanking the enemy flagship. She could see its massive form ahead, bristling with weapons and reinforced shields. Memories of past defeats flashed in her mind, ships she had watched destroyed, cities reduced to rubble. But she pushed the fear aside. Today, she had allies she could trust, a fleet that had adapted and grown stronger, and a plan designed to exploit the enemy's weaknesses. As they approached, the flagship unleashed a massive volley of energy beams. Crithan shields flickered under the assault, and panic threatened to take hold. Viril steadied her breath, signaling her squadron to execute a maneuver they had only practiced a handful of times. Following the human lead, they twisted and darted through the assault, engines screaming, weapons firing in perfect coordination. One of her pilots, a young Crithan named Leora, hesitated for a split second, caught between two enemy ships. Viril's voice cut through comms. "Trust your training. Move!" Leora adjusted, following the path laid out by a human wing nearby. Her ship surged forward, dodging fire and finding an opening in the flagship's defenses. Energy disruptors activated, pulses rippling outward and temporarily disabling the flagship's shields. Viril's squadron seized the moment, firing concentrated volleys at weak points. The flagship shuddered, sparks flying from breached sections. Enemy formations began to falter as smaller vessels attempted to compensate for the disruption, their coordination breaking down. Morgan's voice was steady over comms. "Now, all units converge, focus fire on the command nodes, target their control systems." The fleet responded immediately. Human and Crithan ships executed daring maneuvers, threading through enemy fire with skill born of training and trust. Krithan lasers struck vulnerable points, while human ships applied continuous pressure from unexpected angles. Enemy ships tried to adapt, but the combination of unpredictability and precision proved overwhelming. Viral's eyes locked on the flagship as it began to list, massive hull panels buckling under the sustained assault. Sparks and smoke erupted from its surface, and critical systems failed one by one. Yet the enemy commander was not surrendering easily. A massive energy beam discharged, cutting through several of Viral's squadron ships. Alarms blared, warning systems flashed red, and panic rippled through the ranks. "Stay calm," Viral shouted over comms, her voice cutting through the chaos. "Stick to the plan, trust your training." She executed a maneuver she had once thought impossible, diving her ship between two enemy fire streams and firing directly at the flagship's command nodes. A chain reaction of explosions rippled through the enemy vessel, and its weapons systems went offline completely. The flagship began to spin, unbalanced and disabled, leaving the remaining enemy forces vulnerable and leaderless. Victory hung in the balance. The remaining enemy ships, disoriented and without coordination, began to retreat. Krithan and human pilots pressed the advantage, forcing the fleeing fleet to scatter in panic. It was the first time in decades that Krithans had seen a clear and decisive victory against such overwhelming odds. Viral exhaled sharply, relief and exhaustion flooding her body. Her claws loosened their grip on the railing, and she allowed herself a brief moment of triumph. The fleet had survived, and more than that, they had won. Krithan ships returned to orbit, some damaged but intact, guided by human coordination and technology. Pilots cheered over comms, voices trembling with disbelief and elation. Morgan's voice cut through, calm as ever. "This is not the end, but it is a beginning. You have proven that your fleet is strong, capable, and adaptable. Remember this feeling because it is proof of what we can achieve together." Marvin approached Viral, his expression a mixture of awe and pride. "I never imagined such coordination possible. The humans, they have changed everything." "Yes," Viral said softly. "They have not just given us tactics or devices. They have given us a new way of thinking, and that is stronger than any weapon." As the fleets regrouped, communication channels lit up with messages from enemy commanders requesting surrender. The once mighty coalition, shocked by the effectiveness of the human Krithan strategy, recognized that further resistance would be futile. One by one, their transmissions confirmed their submission. Viral felt a surge of triumph and disbelief. After months of near defeat, after countless losses and desperate nights, Xiron 7 and the Krithans had survived. The humans had not only helped them fight, they had shown them a new path forward, one built on trust, courage, and ingenuity. The enemy's surrender was formalized in a joint human-Krithan command conference. Delegates from both sides met in orbit, holographic displays projecting their discussions across the chamber. The humans acted as mediators, ensuring that the Krithans retained their sovereignty while facilitating a peaceful resolution. The enemy leaders, humbled and weary, agreed to withdraw, leaving the planet in the hands of its rightful defenders. Viral watched the proceedings with a mixture of pride and relief. She thought of her pilots, the young Krithans who had learned to trust themselves and their allies. She thought of the humans, whose courage, creativity, and unwavering confidence had turned despair into victory. And she understood something profound. The strength of a people did not lie solely in weapons or numbers, but in their will to act, their ability to adapt, and their willingness to trust. Celebrations began quietly at first. Ships returned to orbit, systems repaired, and pilots reunited with crews and loved ones. There was laughter, applause, and stories shared of the battle's most daring moments. Humans and Krithans alike celebrated together, forging bonds that transcended language, culture, and species. Viral walked along the main observation deck, observing the fleet as it moved with precision and purpose. She spotted young Krithan pilots talking and laughing with human counterparts, sharing stories of maneuvers and near misses, their fear replaced with confidence. The transformation was evident not only in skill but in spirit. Morgan approached her once more, placing a hand on the console. "Your fleet fought brilliantly, not just with weapons but with courage and trust. That is what victory requires." Viral nodded. "Yes, but we must remember this war is not entirely over. Others may come and we must be ready." Morgan smiled. "Then prepare, train, adapt, and continue to trust. With humans at your side, Crithans have proven that even the impossible can be achieved. That evening, as the sun set over the horizon of Xiron 7, casting long shadows across the recovering cities, Viril stood alone on a balcony overlooking the planet. The scars of war were still visible, but hope had returned. Humanity had arrived, not as conquerors or observers, but as partners. Together, they had turned the tide of war and secured a future that had once seemed impossible. The stars above Xiron 7 shone brightly, reflecting on the calm surface of the repaired oceans. Viril took a deep breath, feeling the weight of responsibility lift slightly. The Crithans had survived, not because of numbers or technology alone, but because they had learned to adapt, to trust, and to fight with courage. The humans had shown them a path forward, and they had walked it together. In the days that followed, the human fleet began to prepare for exploration alongside Crithans. Together, they repaired damaged cities, rebuilt fleets, and trained new pilots in the combined methods that had proven so effective. Xiron 7 began to shine once more as a symbol of resilience and unity, a beacon in a galaxy that had underestimated humanity. Viril knew the future would bring new challenges, new enemies, and new tests of courage. But she also knew something profound. Humans had arrived at the right time, not just to fight, but to inspire, to teach, and to show the Crithans that hope, creativity, and courage could turn even the darkest hour into victory. As she looked out at the stars, Viril allowed herself a rare smile. Xiron 7 had been saved, and with humans by their side, the Crithans were ready to face whatever the galaxy might throw at them next. The war had ended in their favor, but the adventure, the exploration, the partnership, the courage, was only beginning. The stars above Xiron 7 twinkled with promise, reflecting the unity and strength of two species who had once been strangers, but were now allies, friends, and partners in shaping the future of the galaxy.